Today, I'm going to give you a labor economist perspective on what I saw managing a data science team during the Great Resignation. Now, it's the first time I lean on my economics background in machine learning context. And so I was careful to not go too deep into theory or include proofs or cite empirical research, but for those of you who don't know, managerial science is in fact informed by labor economics, and it is practiced much like data science with large amounts of data. There are experiments that people run to test theories. There's a strong mathematical foundation and data foundation to a lot of what I present today, but I'm giving just a high level. I'm stating things at fact that you might question. I'm happy to chat about it after. So today I'll talk about a little bit about what is the Great Resignation. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it in your own teams or have thought about quitting or have quit in the last year and found new jobs. I'll talk about levers of retention from a point of view of a manager. I'll talk about solving complex optimization problem, because I think it's something that is really important to think about, is that we as humans are constantly optimizing our choices, right? We make choices every day to optimize our happiness, our lifetime income, our ability to enjoy life balance, and understanding that both the firm and the workers are trying to solve really complex optimization problems over periods of time really helps to put into perspective the relationship between the two groups. I'll talk a little bit about hiring strategy. You'll see that hiring comes last in my advice on hiring strategy, because there's other things you can do first. And I'll end by talking a little bit about productivity optimization and how to get to that long-term stability that you're looking for your team. Okay. When I joined Kinaxis, it was August of 2021, and I had a team of 6 people that was intended to grow, and there were 8. I had 8 people reporting to me, and there was a machine learning engineering team that was a sister team to mine that also had about the same number of people. And between December in 2021 and January 2022, we lost 7 seniors between those 2 teams. And that was kind of my introduction to what to do when you're holding things together with staple and goodwill, okay? So what happened? So obviously, tech was one of the industries that saw the most change, I think, in the way we think about our relationship with work. It turned out that we could have been working from home this whole time, because in fact, for the majority of tech workers, the work is high-focused, quiet work that you do best, in whatever condition are best for you. Some people are still happy to go back to the office, but I think on average, the majority of tech workers are like, wow, I could have been going for a walk every morning and start my day happy instead of commuting to the office and being stressed. And so another thing that came from the remote work opportunity is that now we're no longer tethered to our physical location. It means we can apply to work at, Meta, Twitter, all of these companies, which at the time didn't have offices in Toronto, all of a sudden were going fully remote. And we were competing for talent. Canadian companies were competing for talent now on the global scale. And the kind of salaries that people were being offered was Silicon Valley level salaries, not Toronto salaries, or Ottawa salaries in my case, right? And so that was created a lot of increased pressure on wages, people's expectation. And so it's not just, I'll talk about it more in the talk, but people don't only care about wages, I'm sure you all know. People also care about quality of life, having people who respect them. There's some statistics that were published about why people quit, and some of the top reasons were things like, I want more money, of course. I don't have childcare. I need to be working from home. I'm not respected by my boss. I don't feel valued, right? And so if you're in that condition, and before you were like, well, it's a small market, I don't want to burn bridges, and now all of a sudden you have recruiters from all the big tech in your inbox. You're like, okay, maybe I should see what's out there, right? So people were reprioritizing and seeing what actually make sense for them. Part of the shock that the pandemic created is like, we might all die. I want to spend more time with my kids, right? I want to have a better life, and I want more money now so I can retire faster. And then there's also like, we saw kind of some phenomenon appear, like, you know, a lot of the high leadership and managerial roles were people in boomers and Gen X, and maybe they value a lot things like, I have a ping pong office. I have a ping pong table at the office. And then, you know, the millennial and Gen Z who form the majority of the workforce now are like, I don't really care. I can play ping pong in the park while I walk my dog, right? Why would I care about these perks? And people started being really critical of all these perks of the office. Like, great, you're giving me free dinner so that I work 18 hours a day. It doesn't sound like a good deal anymore, right? You'd rather just be home and make your own dinner. And so these kind of generational differences started being a bit more stark around that time. And ultimately, with all this pressure, it's a workers' market, right? Because people know they can negotiate high salaries, they can negotiate better conditions for themselves. And so, yeah, they were quitting en masse. And so as a leader, when you're faced with increased turnover, the only thing you can do is retain, rebuild, and stabilize. And so I'll talk about this. Those are kind of like the underlying trend of my talk. How do you retain? How do you rebuild? How do you stabilize? Some facts about data science team that I don't think anybody will fight me on, but I'm available after the talk if you want to fight. The majority of the work requires high focus. So pre-pandemic, most of us were in these like open concept cubicle farms. And I don't know about you, but it was an absolute nightmare for me. Because you'd be sitting there with people talking to you while you're trying to code. And it's not conducive to productivity at all, right? In order to like bring value, as a data scientist, I need to sit for 4 or 5 hours undisturbed. I need to have focused time to be able to think about stuff and code, right? So now being able to do this from home and have like a perfect ergonomic setup, you know, everybody was posting these setups on LinkedIn at one point, right? I got these three screens, and I got like all these different computers, and I got my stand-up desk, right? And the company paid for it. But then on the other side, the meetings, so many meetings, because what would have been super easy in face-to-face interaction, things like you need to ask the data team something like, it's a 5-minute talk, but now you have to book a meeting to talk about this. And so on the one hand, you're more productive because you're home. On the other hand, you're not able to deliver value as fast because you can't gain consensus with people fast enough, and you end up in these endless meetings which also eat away at your productive time and your focus. So something to keep in mind is the right technology can actually enable this. But because everything was shut down for a period, nobody invested in technology. And so we were all like married to Microsoft Teams and trying to make the best of it. Okay, some levers of retention. People respond to incentive. This is almost a platitude at this point. Economists have been saying this for years. It's a very common thing to say. But the challenge as a manager is to know what is it that people respond to, actually. Because not everybody cares about the same things equally. Some people want money. Some people want a title. Some people want interesting work, so you can keep them happy with just projects. And some people just want better life balance and to be, supported in saying like, I'm sorry, I'm really stressed right now. I need to go for a walk, right? And I'll come back and code. But the thing is, you don't know. You have many people on your team, and if you're treating them like an homogeneous mass, you're never going to know which lever to employ to retain people. So what should your retention strategy look like? Well, not everybody has to be retained, right? So the first thing you should think about is, who should I retain and why? So people who are early to mid-career should not be encouraged to stay in the same firm for more than 5 years, in my opinion, right? I'm very candid with people about this because as an economist, I've seen the data. And if you want to maximize your lifetime income, if that's the thing that you care about, you should move every 2 to 5 years. Because you always get more by moving than you do by staying. Your raise will never be as much as the raise you get by getting another job, even if it's a lateral move. You can easily get, a 20% increase on your salary. And these days, it's way more than that. And so don't keep people who should be going, right? Treat this as networking as well. Like managing people and building relationship means that you have like a network, and when that network spreads, it's good for you. So embrace those career inflection points and celebrate people who move on. Okay? That being said, it's really important to identify the key players. So people who create solid peer effects. So in economics, we have this concept that you all are aware of, which is that if you have really productive people working together, it's not a linear increase, it's exponential, right? Like people will accelerate the value if you put the right people together. So you want to focus on the people that have a really positive impact on their peers, who accelerate knowledge sharing, and who accelerate deployment and production. And of course, back to my previous slide, you have to know what is it that makes people tick, right? So if you actually take the time to learn about each person on your team as a human, and you find out what it is that they want, you can actually help them stay. Because I've actually made that mistake, which was to promote and give a raise to someone who fundamentally just wanted different work. And I could have potentially kept that person if I'd realized, or if he had been, comfortable enough to candidly say, I hate this project I'm on. I've been doing this for over a year. I'm the only person doing it, and I don't want to do this, right? And that person left for like wildly different kind of work. But the thing about data scientists is a lot of them are generalists, right? Like you can work across so many different domains. Like if you know data and you know how to code and you know how to run a successful POC, you can do this anywhere. And you're not actually married to any given company. So companies have to keep you interested and keep you engaged if they want to keep you. Okay, those complex optimization problems. This is the most lecture-like portion of my talk. So firms are looking to choose the right mix of labor and capital that will maximize profit, subject to a set of constraints on labor and capital. So in plain English, who do I hire? How many of them? What kind of technology do I use? And then technologies have different costs, people have different costs, and the right mix of people and technology will deliver you the highest profit. Okay? So that's the profit maximization problem of the firm. Workers, on the other hand, have much more complicated optimization problems to solve. And you can think about this for yourself. I'm sure you may not have framed it this way if you don't have training in economics, but I'm sure at a high level you think about this. We're looking, as human, to pick how we use our time such that we maximize our happiness, right? And happiness is a really complex function which has as input money, free time, growth, time with family, mental health, and a lot of other things, right? And that's all subject to constraints on time and the substitutability between time and money, because not everything is, and a lot of economics models are very simplistic when it comes to that. Like we assume that time is money and you can just equally substitute between the two, which is obviously not true. The time that I spend at work and away from my child, I cannot buy that back, right? The fact that my kid was in daycare for like all the years before the pandemic and that I missed all this time with him is not something I can purchase, right? It's gone. And that's fine, because at the time I was optimizing in such a way that I was okay with that, and I felt like I was compensated enough, and I was thinking long-term, me spending all this time at work is going to buy him a better future, it's worth it, right? And maybe that's still true, but the pandemic kind of put that into perspective. So both problems are over many time periods. So they're really like joint dynamic optimization problem. They are theoretically solved with like Hamiltonian functions, and you have all these like dynamic variables. It's super complicated. But really, we do this every day. We do these complex optimization problems in our head every day. So let's simplify the problem and think about the short term and the long term. Okay? In economics, the short term is the time under which capital is fixed. So in practice, in tech, we can think about this as your tech stack and your set of tools is fixed in the short term, right? You can't just switch to another platform. You can't just buy another tool in the blink of an eye. So that's your short term. It's not like defined in days or weeks. It's defined in the period under which your tech stack is fixed. And then, so in the short term, the only thing you can vary is labor. The only thing you can optimize for profit is the way that you manage your team and make them productive so that you create more value. So managers are in a difficult position where you're, on one hand, representing the firm and trying to optimize the firm's profit. But in order to do that, you have to really make sure that the workers' objectives are well understood so that they stay and help you with that short-term optimization. So how do you understand this workers' optimization problem? So again, mind-blowingly, you have to think about people as humans who have entire lives away from work, right? I always tell my team that real life is at home, right? Work is something you do for money. And passion, for a lot of us, quite frankly, like companies are really lucky that data science and ML ops are fields that attract truly curious, truly passionate people who often will do this as hobby, right? Like so many of us are like, have GitHub repos or doing things for fun on the weekend. But you don't have to, right? You can also just work for money. And if you recognize that as a fundamental, in fact, that is the exchange, right, between a firm and a worker. I give you money, and you give me like code, right? So talk to people and ask what they're looking to do, short-term, long-term. Like, what is it that they want to do? What are their objectives? What is it that they want to achieve? What kind of data scientist or ML engineer do they want to be? There's so many kinds, right? Are they more focused on research? Are they more focused on fixing things? Are they like a fixer? You know the fixer on a team? Those are great. And so on. If you get to know people as individuals, you'll know what makes them tick, both in the short term and the long term. You have to establish regular opportunities for growth, for people to do something more than what they do every day, because it's impossible to keep people if you always give them the same boring task, right? Back to that curiosity, which is what we hire for. We hire people for curiosity. We have to keep that curiosity alive. And then say thank you, right? Make sure that people are publicly recognized for doing good work. Thank you goes a long way, actually, when people do really great things. Create an environment in which people feel safe to try and fail. Like, people keep saying fail fast and agile, but in practice, in a lot of firms, management is not comfortable with the failure. But as you know, if you manage a data science team, you have to just make people be okay with failure, because if you want to innovate, and as an aside, you've all heard of creative destruction lab, yeah? Creative destruction in economics is this concept by which things are renewed, and it's renewed through innovation and drastic changes in what we produce, right? And that, in a lot of companies, is going to come, in tech companies, that innovation and that growth is actually dependent on having a really active data science team. Because if you don't, what is it that you productize exactly, right? You eventually are going to run out of things to put in production unless you allow people to experiment and prototype and POC and bring new ideas to market. Again, back to supporting people in the long term and thinking about their growth and thinking about the fact that they're going to leave you, you should let people have time to develop skills that they need to be competitive on the labor market. So for a lot of data scientists, it's going to be ops skills. Like someone who can build a model and put it in an API and deploy it is just way more hireable than someone who can't, right? And actually, it has a lot of value for the firm, because now you have someone who can do two things. You can have like some fungibility of resources across different teams. And so instead of seeing it like a waste of time, create these learning opportunities, create these cross-training opportunities. You get value from it. You probably retain a bit longer. And then the people actually, grow and go on to do bigger, better things. Pay people what they're worth. Because actually, as a firm, you don't have to just let people go get another job to get paid more. It is because if that person leaves today and you have to hire to replace them, newsflash, you're going to have to hire for the salary that they're leaving for. You could have just paid them and save you the hiring costs, right? So if it's worth it, pay people. And all this is kind of, why should you care so much and why should you give people so much growth? Because there's this concept called efficient wage theory. And that, in this case, includes more than the wage, it's the total compensation. It's this idea that if you give people enough, they will produce way more, right? And again, leveraging the fact that data scientists and engineers are super passionate and super curious and really prone to overwork and burn out. You want to create conditions such that people feel happy and supported so that they work really hard. And you end up with a lot of value out of it. All right, hiring strategy. So we talked about retention. Now I'm going to talk about rebuilding. So from that position of, so you're left with 2 data scientists and 1 engineer. And I exaggerate, we had more people than that, but it felt like it for a while. So we had tight deadlines for deliveries, a number of projects underway. And we had really a large amount of juniors, no seniors, and it was really tough. So what did we do? Manage expectations. You'll see on that list, hire is at the bottom, and it's not an accident. Because the first thing you have to do is actually manage expectations. Your stakeholders, the delivery team, you just have to set expectation and look at what can move. Right? Because if you burn out the last of your team, you're done, right? You're just going to go belly up. So it's important to reset expectation for short-term delivery. The other thing you can do is, it's not just data scientists that need to grow and have opportunities to learn new skills. They are cousin and sister teams throughout the firm, or they might be if you're in a firm large enough, where people actually have the skills you need. They're just doing different jobs. I'm thinking data engineers, analytics engineers, and so on, right? So there's a number of people who can do some of the tasks that your data scientists were doing. And so it might be possible to temporarily borrow those high performers and give them cross-training opportunity that they then, use for their next role. Sometimes you might end up hiring those people as well. Make sure you're able to retain. So while you're looking to hire, think back to those first few slides and make sure that you have identified your key people and that you are treating them the best that you can, right? Because if you don't, you're going to end up in a situation where you have no one to transfer the knowledge, right? So when you hire or when you bring external teams to show up your team, you need to think about knowledge transfer. You need some people that are going to be able to train others into this thing that you do, right? No matter what product you're building or delivering, you need some institutional knowledge. Because goodness knows that magical documentation sprint never happens. Okay? And finally, hire. So hire carefully, because you need a mix of junior, mid-level, and seniors. And I don't know how many people have been in a hiring role before. Hiring mid-level and seniors is really hard, right? Because they're probably already happy somewhere. And for those kind of level, you're really competing with those large tech now, right? So you better have a total compensation package that's attractive. You better have really good work condition. You better have a team worth bragging about to bring these people over to you, right? Because in these kind of situations, you're interviewing them, but they're interviewing you, right? Why should I come work for you? What is it that you offer, right? And like, obviously, I am currently promoting myself as a person you should work for. But yeah, thinking about that is difficult. It's easier to hire juniors because the market is saturated with new grads, with people who are looking to come into data science. But again, it's difficult because you end up, the last intern I hired, I had 947 applications. And it was for a co-op undergrad role. And I had PhDs applying, right? Which is like soul crushing because you're like, you should not be applying to be an intern. But people are really desperate to break into the field, and I sympathize with that, right? But yeah, so you need that mix of junior, mid-level, and seniors, knowing that mid-level and seniors are going to take much longer to recruit. You should probably start your recruitment strategy like 6 months before you need them to start, which means that if you suddenly lost a chunk of seniors, you're way too late to start hiring. So you might do with some juniors in the short term to just kind of like have enough coders to get the product out, but you're still creating some debt that you're going to have to pay later, right? So this isn't a tech debt so much as like a managerial debt, in the sense that now you're going to have a bunch of junior, no one to mentor them, and no one to train them. So you personally will have to like prop things up, right? So that makes for longer days. That being said, I always think that in hiring it's important to play the long game. What do I mean by that? We're a fairly small market here, right? And people know each other. So when interviewing, it's important to think about the fact that maybe someone you're seeing today isn't the right match, but maybe in 6 months they will be. And if you leave them with a really good experience from the interview, if you're respectful, if you let them know what to expect, if you're quick in your decision and you don't keep people hanging, they won't be mad that they didn't get the job. They might be disappointed, but they won't feel like you wasted their time. And that becomes someone in your network that is now interested in potentially working for you one day. So it is expensive, but it's worth to put in more time, especially in a time of like high turnover. I did a lot more interview than is advisable when I was hiring the last few rounds because I wanted to just get to know as many people as possible, right? I treated a lot of these first round interviews. It's not like I put people through like extensive series of interviews that I had no intention to hire because that would be disrespectful. But I did a lot of that initial round. I didn't let HR do the initial round. I wanted to personally meet the people, which meant that I had some time, like 14 interviews a week while doing everything else. But I think it's going to pay off in the long term. So much like finding a job requires like very active networking, finding talent requires very active networking as well, right? Like we all benefit off each other. Interview people with high potential who have crappy resume. That's often the case for PhDs. And as someone who transitioned away from academia, I am maybe better able than others at seeing the skills that people don't think to highlight about themselves, right? So you'll see things like no mention of programming. And then you see the project they worked on and they like studied the patterns of stars across like multiple galaxies. And I'm like, surely you must have coded this. And they're like, oh yeah, of course. But you have no coding skills listed on your resume. Or I interviewed a geophysicist who was studying like long waves, using like sound waves to detect petrol deposits offshore. Really complex data problem, no skills listed. It was like she had never coded in her life. I'm like, you must have coded your thesis. And she did. Of course she did, right? But that pipeline is really important because back to that right mix on the team, it's not just junior, mid-level, and senior. It's also really good if you're in an R&D kind of data science. You also want that mix of like PhDs and masters and undergrad because the PhDs are going to come up with a lot of really innovative ideas. And they're going to be closer to the frontier of research. And it's going to be easier for them to train others because they've taught at university. It's going to be easier for them to do presentations because that's actually the skills that they're taught in grad school, right? And so they are like often future leaders, but it's really hard for them to come into the industry because academia is soul crushing, and it teaches you that you are no good and should die. And so, often when you have these people on your team, you spend a lot of time as a counselor telling them that they are, in fact, really brilliant and have, in fact, a lot of value, and they should not let that mean advisor voice in their head talk them down, right? And so back to the networking and long game, sometimes you see those PhDs as are early in their transition, and it's just hard to hire them because it's hard to make a case. They failed a coding interview despite having a PhD in computer science. They failed a whiteboarding interview despite being trained and answering exactly that question. And they just, freeze. But if you treat them with respect and if you help them and give them useful feedback, they might be someone you'll hire next year, in 6 months, in your next role, who knows, right? They're super high potential people that you should nurture and value. So yeah, if you were given the chance to break into this field, you should pay it forward. Okay, and I'm getting towards the end of the talk. So we talked about retaining, we talked about rebuilding, and now I'm going to talk a little bit about stabilize. Right? I mean, stabilize was kind of weaved throughout, if you've noticed, that thinking about the right mix of workers, thinking about having seniors and juniors, thinking about bringing in other people. But yes, let's remember the long term. So in the short term, I can only enhance productivity by making it easier to collaborate. So I have a fixed tool stack. I have a fixed tech stack. But I have people, and I can help these people work together better. So that means teaching people how to use the tools they have really well, right? Don't call a meeting if you just want to ask a question. Just pick up the phone, right? Or just use chat. Just send people a question, not a 30-minute ask on their time, for example. But at the same time, facilitate things like that documentation sprint. Maybe it sounds ridiculous to have it in the middle of high turnover, but maybe it's your last chance to have it. So improving your documentation so that there is knowledge to be transferred. Facilitating pair coding, peer reviews, code reviews, mentoring people. So if you do that, it might initially seem like you're creating more meetings or that you are having to give away more of your time. But if you do it right, you end up with happier, more productive people. So the people you have are better able to deliver value. And so you want to create a healthy work culture that triggers those peer effect I talked about earlier, right? So condition where people are free to ask questions, don't feel stupid when they don't know something, feel okay saying, I don't know how to do this, can you help me? If you create those kind of conditions, people rise up. And they rise up fast. It's actually a really good time. If you yourself are in a team where a lot of people have gone, this is your time. You can get promoted way faster. Because if you stand up and start leading others and start being a reliable contributor, it'll get noticed, right? And so create opportunity for people to get noticed. That said, in the long term, you can vary capital, or in our case, the stack, right? So while you're focusing on labor optimization in the short term, you should look at those tools. You should be looking at vendors. You should be testing open source solutions. And the thing is, data scientists love testing open source solutions, right? So you can put people on short-term special POC projects that are about productivity and kind of create this evaluation of what should I do about my stack so that I make it easier for people to work and deliver value. Okay, summary. Data scientists are people. I know, shocking. People respond to incentive. To know which incentive you need to use, you need to know the people. To deliver data products at scale, you need stable teams. You have stable teams when turnover is high. You need to continuously retain, hire, train, and mentor. Or, as I said before, retain, rebuild, stabilize. Okay? And the long term is going to come faster if you plan for it today. So, as I said, there is no time on like what is short term versus long term. But long term is that time at which point you can switch capital investments. If you start planning for it today, it'll come faster. And if you don't plan for it today, you'll burn out your team. That's it. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to take questions.
I have a question, actually. As a new company just starting out, what's a reasonable time period to scale out your full-time hires for the long term of product development, especially with an AI or machine learning-based solution?
If you're starting a company?
Yeah, just starting out, yeah.
If you're starting a company, you should hire analysts first.
Analysts first.
Because you need people who are going to look at the data for you. You can hire data scientists, you can hire some engineers, but the first people you need, I mean, if you're building a data product, you should know about your data.
Okay. And
so personally, I would start with analysts. And maybe some ops people that can plan how you're going to get in the long term. It's a mistake that a lot of companies do to hire data scientists when they have no data, no tech stack, and no one to work with them. They just end up with a very expensive person sitting on a MacBook and nothing to do.
So, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, Jessie.
Hi, Liz.
This is going to be probably a weird question, but you talked a little bit about helping people get where they want to be in their career, right?
Yep.
So say I'm very passionate about learning about patterns, data, and everything, but I also need to be aware of the market, right? I need to know what people would really want. If you were to talk to future leaders, future people that want to be in data science, what do you think are the best combination of skills that people need these days?
Just let me rephrase. So your question is, if someone on my team is a data scientist who'd like to move towards a leadership role in the future, what is the right combination of skills they should look for?
I guess maybe it's a two-sided question. Do you think we should just play to our strengths all the time? Should we look at the market value, what the market values? That would be like the first part of the question. And the second is, how would you get there? So in the specific second question, let's pretend, yes, someone wants to be a leader in the future.
Okay. So in terms of like how to optimize short-term and long-term the skills you acquire, and should you look at the market always, you should look ahead of the market, actually a little bit, right? So 5 years ago, I invested in ops skills for myself when no one cared about ops. And I had a strong competitive advantage in data. But the fact that I could speak about deploying things in production, the fact that I could speak about the full life cycle from data pipelines all the way to implementation is what helped me get to where I am today. I'm by no means an ops person, but I can talk to them, and I know how to ask good questions because I know enough about the work that they do, and with some help I can do the work too. And so I think actually the skill that you should acquire, depending on where you are in your career, but it's the big picture of what it is that your product is. The full pipeline, from like solving a business problem, acquiring data, creating the data pipeline, model, experimentation, deployment, decisions, end user, right? And if you have that full vision, then you're able to better market yourself, I think. And then I think that also kind of speaks to your other question. But that other question is also, it really depends what skills you have to start with. So I mentioned a lot of people who come from academia tend to underplay what they learn in academia. But what shocked me the most when I moved to industry was the fact that things that everyone took for granted in academia were considered leadership skills. Things like public speaking, right? When I was a grad student, I was teaching classes in large auditorium. No one gave me public speaking lessons before I did it. I just was thrown into the fire and told to figure it out, right? The ability to teach yourself stuff really quickly and to make decisions fast is something that you're taught in academia. Now, if you don't have those skills, those are good skills. Like, those are leadership skills. Being able to teach and train and mentor and talk to various stakeholders. So being able to explain complicated things to people who are not technical at all is how you advocate for your team and show the value that they're bringing, right? Because if somebody asks you, why did the model make this decision? And your answer is, because the math. It's not super convincing to a business person. They want to know about the logic that happened to get there, right? So being able to have these different levels of communication, I think, is really important. I mean, there's a ton of technical skills that you need to shine. So, like, you should always, in the short term, try to be as good at your job as humanly possible. So, like, if there are any skills that you can identify today that would make you better, more productive, can you automate some tasks that are currently manual? Can you streamline some piece of code? Can you modularize some things? Can you help deployment? Those should probably be short-term things you focus on because they make you a star performer, which makes it most likely that you get promoted. But long-term, understanding what it is that data science does and the value that you bring is what's going to get you into a leadership role. Thank you. Thank you.